Welcome to Field Notes for Pastors, a conversational podcast for pastors and others in ministry as we explore our soul-deep work in the fields of the Lord. Whether you're in a ministry season of fullness or famine, we want to explore themes around Paul's words in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 6. I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God has been making it grow. In today's episode, I'm so thankful to welcome Shanthini Baskaran as we explore the topic of spiritual formation and soul care for the pastor and those in ministry. Shanthini was the daughter of national missionaries in southern India and grew up with a deep love for God and world missions. She loves discipling small groups at church and in prison and through teaching opportunities at home and around the world. Her delight is to encourage others to ground their lives in Jesus Christ. Shanthini is a storyteller who brings a fresh perspective to what discipleship looks like. She is a clinical psychologist by training and is an assistant clinical professor of psychology at Trinity International University, teaching exclusively in Trinity's Extension Center in a Wisconsin prison, helping prisoners get their undergraduate degrees in biblical studies. Shanthini is also a faculty member for the Soul Care Institute. She is happiest sitting out in her garden on a warm day with a good book, having dozens of people over for dinner, or having God conversations over a cup of coffee. Shanthini is married to her husband Vinod for 30 years, and they are empty nesters with 3 adult children and 2 daughters-in-law. I am really grateful to have Shanthini with us today because she's been a consistent voice for soul care over the years and has spoken into the staff of the church where I serve. While I was on sabbatical at one of our staff retreats, she was a guest speaker. So welcome to the podcast, Shanthini.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah. Can you give us a little background on what you're up to now and perhaps also just a little bit of background on your life in ministry?
Well, it's hard to pick one thing of what I'm up to right now, but the big one is working in the prison. So our program teaches men who have had have long sentences, and so they get a degree in biblical studies with a strong minor in psychology. I'm the strong minor in psychology, so that's a big part of my life. But the other big part of my life is the Soul Care Institute, but not just the Soul Care Institute. It's, being in the place of mentoring others through this whole journey of soul care. But at the Soul Care Institute, it's a 2-year program. And I'm the last week of their 2-year program where we develop a rhythm. How do you develop a rhythm of life? How do you live a life with God in the dailiness of life, which is full? So that's kind of what I do. So, yeah.
It's wonderful. Yeah, I'm so glad for both of those things that you just described. I know you're involved in many other things, so I'm sure it is a little bit challenging to decide which things to focus on. And then, when I'm introducing you, I mean, you have grown up in a missions-oriented family. So can you talk a little bit about even your background in ministry? What was that like growing up in a missionary home? And you even mentioned before we started that you're also the mother of a pastor. So you've got this multi-generational ministry kind of heritage and family life. Talk a little bit about what that was like.
Yeah. So growing up, especially in India, but I think anywhere in the world, but growing up in a ministry family, there's one of 2 things. One is you see God at work in a whole different way than, in any other life, I think. You watch your parents live independence. You watch them pray and you watch God do things. And so there's that piece of ministry, growing up, watching God at work. But the other part of it was also, you also see the underside of ministry. As a ministry kid, you hear those stories that other people don't hear. Those stories of failures, those stories of where people have fallen and it's not spoken of, but people know. And so my parents, for many, many people, were a safe place. So we had a lot of people, a lot of Nicodemuses
Mm.
come through our house. And my father, he was a lay counselor, so he would, or at least he uh, read a lot and counseled a lot, and so he was a safe place for a lot of people. And so growing up, even my go deciding to take psychology was because I saw that kind of need.
Mm.
And then, coming to America was a little bit of a shock to the system, because I thought that God had, trained me in psychology to be in India, to be, all of those pieces. But then coming here, our church had, like, at that point of time, had 150 missionary units.
Mm-hmm.
And so our missions pastor asked if I would help uh, do the missionary care for that. And so for over 8 years, I was the volunteer missionary care director for our church. And so, yeah, so that was another big part of helping the wounded, seeing the needs, really digging into what soul care looks like and how do you sustain a life with God in the midst of all the demands of ministry. So,
That's
yeah.
so real, right? That's the real where the rubber meets the road, as we say,
Mm-hmm.
just of how the challenges and the ups and the downs of all that's going on there. I love that. I'm hearing that, your experiences in the growing up gave you this wonderful picture into kind of the life of vibrant faith. And then also you
Mm-hmm.
saw some of the challenges that were coming your parents' way. You like got a firsthand look at that. And then also obviously serving with missionary care with more than 100 missionary units. This is a tremendous view into some of those things. So I'm imagining that when you saw these things happening, and probably even in your work with Soul Care Institute more recently, you probably see a lot of people struggling with different barriers to really having care for their soul or vibrancy in their souls. And I'm just wondering if you could say, what are some of the things that you have seen that have most often stood in the way for people having health in their souls as they're doing the work of ministry? Are there certain themes that you've seen over the years?
Definitely the busyness.
Hmm.
Ministry so often is is a very demanding wife, if you want to put it that way, uh, or a spouse. I mean,
Mhm.
and it can so consume a person's life. I'm right now walking alongside a ministry leader in another country, and this leader is, oh my goodness, is a mover and a shaker. Is doing such amazing work around the world. Is you know, but I asked this person, what are your daily rhythms like? And this
Hmm.
person said, well, I don't have time to read my Bible.
Hmm.
And I was like, wow, because the demands of ministry have become so great that this person doesn't even have the space to even have the 15 minutes to read the Bible, or
Wow.
if that. But it's interesting because over the years, as I've talked to people, that seems to be more the norm of
Hmm.
how ministry people live their lives. It's busy. So the busyness of ministry, the demands of ministry, you think you're doing God's work,
Hmm.
right? And you are doing God's work. But being with God, as one of my friends said, I can, when I'm doing for God, uh, I can see it. There are markers of success. There are things I can say, yeah, I've done that. But being with God, there's no marker for success for that,
Hmm.
and I don't know how to do that because the doing seems so much more pleasing to
Hmm.
God and to people. So there's that part of it, the demands of the ministry, the people aspect of ministry,
Hmm.
where you're always on. There's no off button in the people connections, the people needs, all of those pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, there's your own pride that
Mm-hmm.
comes in the way of, they're looking to me. I need to be the one who helps them. I need to find solutions. I need to be there. And if I'm not there, then how are they going to find help?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, there's there's our own identity which is wrapped around ministry. Without ministry, if I stop, who am I?
Yeah.
There's so much of our identity that's wrapped around ministry. There's the other people's perceptions
Mm-hmm.
of if you decide to stop and take a break, even a pastor taking a day, many in our church, many of our pastors have a day off the week, right?
Right.
More people around them are like, wait a minute, we don't get a day off at work. So why are you getting a day off?
Mm-hmm.
So even other people's, your congregation's perception or your ministry, those you're ministering to, their perceptions of your availability and time is also
Mm-hmm.
a problem is a barrier that comes in the way of soul care.
Mm-hmm.
Many people in ministry, I think we get in to ministry because we want to please God and because we're people also, and that can come in the way of really being with God. So
Mm-hmm. There's so much. I mean, each one of those you just mentioned, we could spend an hour talking about, how do we pull apart our identity from our ministry?
mhm.
How do we pull apart, the appropriate pleasing for God and serving others from inappropriate people pleasing or all these things, or the busyness. I talked to a pastor not too long ago who was just wrestling with this idea of, there's always more to do for God. There's so much there, but I don't want to view God as a taskmaster. And how do I live in appropriate limits? How do I live within my limits? All of these things I think are so real. And I'm imagining people who may be listening in on this podcast may think, oh yeah, I could spend time on this, that, or the other thing. Is there a way, and this is probably a hard question to answer, is there anything that you have found helpful for people you're working with, or maybe in your own journey of soul care, that's enabled you to see when something has moved from that category of, okay, this is in the right place. I'm working for God as an overflow of my own life with Him and gratitude and living within limits. When you see it move from that category of appropriate to, okay, something's wrong now, it's become a dark thing in my life. Is there a way that you think it's helpful for people in ministry to be able to identify that? Anything that you see there?
Yeah, it's kind of like, if you have a formula, it works, right? But
Right.
unfortunately, anything with God it never works with a formula.
Yeah.
I think for me, as I have looked at my own life, and I really can't speak for others, for me, as I've looked at my own life, it's intentionally putting into place rhythms,
Mm-hmm.
that this time with God, and I learned that from my mom. She, when I was a kid, I rebelled so much against the whole rhythm of daily devotions and all of those things. But man, I look back and I'm like, I'm so grateful, because now when I don't, I feel the thirst. I see what my life is without it. So just intentionally putting into place rhythms of how am I going to live my day, so time with God whenever you schedule that, but also over these past few years, just the practice of Examen. Every night before I go to bed, to be able to say, what were the desolations? What were those things that took me away from God? That are those places in my life that made me forget that there's a God who loves me and that I'm His child. And then those consolations of what are those areas in my life that drew me to God, or how did I grow? And that has more, I think, the two things, hearing from God in my times with Him, and
Mm-hmm.
then this processing, those two things are so helpful, are so useful in just the rhythm of our family does one once a year. We do this big grand examen of our whole year, but the dailiness of that, because very often in ministry you can slide and uh, we go through life depending on our own strength rather than on God's, right? And I'm going to tell a story because
Please
I
do.
tell stories. One of my friends, he's a very crusty old man, very strong, very obstinate. But anyways, he had gone into the hospital for a surgery, and the nurses told him that he needs to sip water. It was cardiac surgery, so he had to sip water every day. Regularly, as he recovered. And he's like, I don't need any water. I'm fine. I'm not thirsty. And his wife, who's as strong as he is, said, you need to drink. And he was like, no. And they got into a fight, all of those things. But he goes through this whole thing. And at the end of it, he says, at the end, finally, the nurse came and yelled at me and said, I had to take a sip of water. And so he takes a sip of water and he says, all of a sudden, I realized how thirsty I really was. I didn't know I was thirsty. And so often in ministry, we go through, we do well. We do well in ministry, but we don't know how thirsty we are. And so that's when you get to that dark side where you don't know your thirst. You're running on your own, as Jeremiah would say, you're drawing from broken cisterns or empty cisterns and all of those things. And then something happens, and it doesn't need to be a big bad thing that happens in your life, but you come to this place where to the end of yourself and you're like, wow, what just happened, and so you realize your need for God, but you've gone so far without him that it's harder to come back. So
I love that image from the story of I didn't realize how thirsty I was. I think so many people in ministry can resonate with that. Like you're saying, it's this sense of we're pouring out so much, whether it's preaching or praying with someone or going to visit someone at the hospital or being at the bedside in a family crisis or a death moment. You're pouring out so much that sometimes it can be like you become parched land yourself. Is there something pouring back in? Are you quenching your soul? And there's so many great images of Scripture that speak to that. I'm just, thinking about if somebody's listening to this and feeling in that place of thirst, soul thirst, to draw near, like you said, your time of listening to the Lord in prayer, your time of reflecting at the end of the day with the Examen is such a great practice. So simple, but so profound, I think. What does prayer look like for you right now, Shanthini?
That's a good one. A lot of...
You can take that wherever you want to go.
Yeah, I know. It's been a journey, right? So, and I don't think any of us will ever get there, whatever there is. But, well, I know what there is, but which is really being face to face with Jesus and like Moses, having that conversation where you then reflect his glory. And okay, so that's for me what there is. But, as children, we learn to pray for the needs. So there's that praying for the needs. My mom, when my dad died, she kind of spun out. And she would put Martha Stewart to shame because she was she was an amazing woman, but not just Martha Stewart. She was such a spiritual woman that, people came to her all the time. But when my dad died, she was like, I really don't know how to have a life with God without him. He was her life with God. Then uh, around that time, she began to realize that God is her husband. He's the one who's with her and will never break his covenant with her. Okay. I say this because that's a deep, profound place where you get to this place where God is the one you love and desire. And you get to that space where you realize he will never leave you nor forsake you. And so when she would come here, she would usually was an early riser and, busy. But she would come here, wake up in the morning at 5 o'clock, and then she wouldn't come out of her room till around 10:30. And I'm like, Mom, what are you up to? And she's like, oh, I'm having my time with God. I'm praying. And I'm like, wow, if I do that for 15 minutes, I feel like I'm lucky, But 5.5 hours. And I said, what do you do? And she said, well, I read my Bible and then I pray and then I journal and I pray for all the needs of the people that God brings to mind. And then I put it all aside. And I crawl up on his lap and put my head against his shoulder and just sit there and listen to his heartbeat. That was a profound picture of prayer for me, and learning to do that, of crawling up on the lap of Jesus, putting my head against his shoulder and just being silent, listening to his heartbeat, I think when you do that, or when you're in that space, you begin to realize how very deep his love for you is, right? And how very precious you are to him. But I think there's this year, one of the journey lessons in prayer I've been learning is how to stay with people in prayer, to intercede for people and not give up. You pray once and you go, or I'll pray with you now because I'm never going to remember to pray again, so I'm going to pray with you now. But what does interceding mean? Moses interceded for the people of Israel. Jesus interceded for his people. He does. And, what does that mean to stay in a place with someone and pray? So that's been my journey. And I'm still learning because I'm not a very consistent person. So
hopefully we get to learn for the rest of our lives. I think it's a Thomas Merton quote where he said, there's one thing we can be convinced of, it's that we're beginners our entire lives in the spiritual life. And that's just so reassuring to me. I know this is going to be an audio podcast, but I get to see your face as we're recording, and I could just see the emotion and the tenderness as you were describing crawling onto the lap of Jesus. I wish everybody could have seen that. And just the tenderness of the Lord's love, I could just sense that as we were talking. It reminds me of one of my favorite Psalms, Psalm 131, my heart is not proud, Lord, my lips are not haughty. I do not get all caught up in things too great or too wonderful for me, but I have stilled and quieted my soul like a child with its mother, so is my soul, a weaned child, so is my soul within me. And such a beautiful picture of what the life of prayer is, I think, especially for people in ministry where we can be so much about, okay, what's the next thing, the next meeting, the next event, the next, person I need to talk to. And to just, how lovely that you had that picture from your mom, just to be drawing near to Jesus, like the beloved disciple leaning upon the chest of the Lord. That's so beautiful. What a gift that you got that from your mom.
Yeah. And, like that psalm you quoted, like a weaned child, right? A weaned child does not need anything.
Right.
Is satisfied, right? And when I pray, it's like, God bless this, or God, I'm speaking, you need to, anoint me, anoint the people, whatever.
Yes.
But a weaned child does not ask for anything, is just satisfied. That's a beautiful picture, isn't it? So
just to be satisfied in the Lord, just his presence is enough. Thank you for sharing some of those lessons on prayer and even giving us that intimate look into your mom's life of prayer. I want to ask a kind of a different question. I mentioned this to you ahead of time. I'm a pastor of a church that is a multi-ethnic or multicultural church. And so the whole grasping or grappling with culture in our pathways of discipleship, in our life together as a church, are so interesting for me. It has been over the last 15 years of being here at Eastbrook. But I wanted to ask you, because of your upbringing in a mission family in South India, being in the States, you minister around the world. You've mentioned some of those conversations. Are there any ways that your own personal story or the diverse cultural perspectives that you have encountered have given you maybe a unique view on the topics of soul care, spiritual formation, and the life of ministry?
I think we all have unique perspectives, right? So, yeah,
Right.
but I think one of it is I come from a culture where spirituality is everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
right? All religions have a way of have spiritual practices and good ones, you know, whether it's Hinduism or Islam or Buddhism, they all have spiritual practices, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when you look at spiritual formation, and it's kind of exploded right now in America,
Right.
it's realizing those spiritual practices have been there in the church for centuries, but there are spiritual practices in all of these religions. I think the difference is, one, what is being formed? You know, it's spiritual formation. What is being formed at the end of it? Are you, I mean, is the formation that you're a nicer kind of person?
Mm-hmm.
Or is the formation that you have grown in Christ likeness? Is Christ being formed in you? And have you made room for that to happen? So so watching, I think, growing up in an environment where you saw the spiritual practices, and so the spiritual practices came, I think, more naturally. You know, every morning at 5 o'clock in the morning, the mosque would, you know, the imam would, you'd hear the sound of the mosque, and you'd hear the sound of your neighbors tinkling their little bells as they went into their puja. And you got up in the morning and you had your time with God. It was, you know, the spiritual practices came more naturally because that's part of the rhythm of the culture, right? But it's also been really asking those questions of what is being formed. I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
I think, again, you know, I'd go back to my parents. My parents both came from hard backgrounds. You know, they both had difficult circumstances that brought them to Christ. And so they were determined that their kids would learn about Jesus right from the get-go. But they did a great job of number one, setting an example of what it meant to have a life with God, because they loved Jesus. I mean, God really, you know, the first wave of people from the people of Israel, you know, of course they rebelled and complained and all of that, but they saw God rescue them in a powerful way, right? And that was their narrative. And so for my parents, that was their story. God rescued them. And so we got to be the generation, my brother and I, of then saying, okay, we lived this rescued life, and how does that play out? So a little bit that I think my family helped me in that growing up.
Yeah. So much. I mean, I think even you saying that reminds me a conversation I was having with my worship pastor at our church. This is several years ago. He's from Nigeria, and we were talking about discipleship, spiritual formation. We were in a group of our kind of staff ministry leaders, and he said, "Can I just have us stop for a second?" And we're like, "Okay, where are we going?" And he said, "I just wanted to point out that so much of what we're talking about is so individualistic, so solo oriented." And he said, "For me, and my way of approaching the spiritual life is always so corporate, so community, so relational." And so he like really just changed the conversation in a way that I ended up feeling was so helpful for us. And I hear that kind of similar theme as you're talking. You're talking about your family, you're talking about walking alongside people in prayer, even observing your mother's life of prayer. And it seems like that can be one of the things that can be an affliction in the North American context is the hyper individualism, and can, I guess, limit us from really experiencing, I think, sometimes what God wants to do in our lives because we just think of it in such a solo way. Does that resonate with you at all?
Totally. I mean, and so who is it? I can't remember who said it, but formation happens in community,
Hmm.
right? And you, so you, you, you. I think the North American church does not. Well, that's a broad brush I'm painting with. Most people here don't know what it means to live in community, what
Hmm.
it means to, I was talking to my son about this, of, the importance of having people who would, there's the accountability people, yes,
Hmm.
but just the group
Hmm.
that is sensitive to each other's needs, that says, okay, I'm going to set aside all of these things in my life so that I can be with you at this point of time because uh, you need help.
Hmm.
Or I'm going to pray with you. The sensitivity to people's needs, and then the sensitivity to where there's a shift. Like,
Hmm.
how are you walking with God? To have the authority or the relationship that asks those questions
Hmm.
means that you have taken time to be with each other before God, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
And again, in a culture that is very community oriented, I can
Hmm.
see that. But having said that, I think my husband and I, we've really grown in that, even over here, where
Hmm.
I think in the American context, there's more trust. There's not much community, but they trust people. We trust people differently than we
Hmm.
do in India. And so
Hmm.
to bring both of those together, the community and the trust,
Yeah.
has been such a gift. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. That's a
But
beautiful
it's so
thing.
necessary. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You're kind of bringing out the best of both worlds, so to speak. You're
Hmm.
learning those things together. That's been some of my experience here too, even though, growing up in the States, but now being in a church community that has folks from 30 different nations present. And it just, I'm like, oh, this is a blind spot I have in myself. I can tend to think very individualistically for that example. And then, even like you say, there can be this willingness to trust a little more quickly than maybe in some other places. That's really, really fascinating. Oh man, my brain's going a million directions, Shantini, but I want to ask you one question, and it's not one I really prepared you for, but it's around this idea of kind of multi-generational. I think a lot of times in ministry, one of the barriers can be within our families. We want to prioritize our family life so that it's good and healthy. We don't want to sacrifice our families on the altar of ministry. I had a mentor kind of say that to me. But at the same time, it's hard to know how to cultivate healthy rhythms with a family in ministry, whether we're a pastoral role or serving on top of our regular day job or in some other parachurch ministry. How have you and Vinod cultivated that family life in the midst of serving quite a bit? Are there things that you have found to be particularly helpful? You talked before about an annual examen that you do maybe together, but are there other things that you guys have found particularly helpful, yeah, in cultivating that family life, which can be a challenge for a lot of people in ministry?
Yeah. I mean, it requires a lot of, let's say the word, self sacrifice,
Mm-hmm.
right? Now, self sacrifice done under the authority of Jesus
Yeah.
is not the same as this place where you're running, 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 and giving, giving, giving. It's
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
Uh, and if you asked me to tell you the difference, I wouldn't be able to. But, anyways,
I feel that.
uh, for us, it's not just the ministry world, it's even the secular world. So my husband is in the secular world, right? And one of the reasons we took up this assignment in America was because he was traveling so much. He didn't see, my oldest son didn't learn to say Papa till he was a year old, And so we decided that we would make shifts. He decided, here's the self-sacrifices. He let go of a whole bunch of promotions so that he wouldn't travel, but would be at home. I let go of career to stay home so that we would have a stable space for our kids. So there were things that, again, this is not right or wrong for all families, but there were things that we did that we said, this is important. However, there are places that we will draw back in order to have that happen. But even then, family life, our bringing up of our children was discipling, right? It's discipleship that we're not just, anyways. So parenting also is disciple making. And so we pulled into our rhythms of our family. What do we want our kids to grow in? We want them to grow in learning to look outside of themselves and to serve. So we put into our family rhythms of serving, that they would not just go and serve by themselves, or we would go and serve by ourselves, but that we would serve as a family. We, if that was like going and singing in the nursing home once a week for 9 years, we did that. Or, taking our kids on a family missions team, we did, those kind of things. We put into place rhythms of prayer. That was a big thing for us, because I think our oldest was hitting high school when we realized we've taught our kids to pray, but we really haven't taught them to take a prayer retreat time away from God, away with God. And so twice a year, we put that into rhythm, so that in December, we have this time where we examine the year together. It's a lot of fun, but it's just beautiful. And then in June, July, we come together again and have this time of, just praying together. Well, how has this year gone so far? How can we pray for each other? And it was crazy because we thought our kids would never be able to do that, but they did, So all that to say, it is a rhythm. There are times when ministry will take precedence. There are times when the family will take precedence. But at each spot to say, what is Jesus wanting to do here in our family life? What is Jesus wanting to do here in our ministry life? And then following Jesus into that, rather than saying, I have to or I need to, versus I get to, and then that brings a joy in what you're doing. Now, have we done this rhythm thing well? No, we're learning. But I think being a little bit intentional about it has, again, teaching helps. As I've learned, it helps to put into place the rhythm. You'll never be able to balance family and ministry. You'll never be able to say, oh, my kids were so fully attended to me that they were not jaded with ministry. I have stories which my kids have said, you were in church a lot, and we struggled with algebra or whatever it was, because we were homeschooling at that time. Or the same way with ministry, Shanthini wasn't available when we had this meeting or things like that. There will be places where you cannot hold all the balls up. That would make you God. So you say, okay, God, here I am. What do you want? What do you want me to do? So again, here, this has been a new kind of learning for me, is when you look at Saul's life and David's life, one of the things that makes a difference in their lives is so often in the Bible, you see David inquiring of the Lord. Should I go into battle? Should I stay? Should I, he inquires of God. Saul doesn't. And I feel that's the difference with, when you're balancing ministry and work, is if you're doing it like Saul, not inquiring of God and just going and doing, what you think you need to be doing because he was being a king and he was doing it effectively. You're going to be in the place of Saul, where you get to a place where the Lord left him and he never knew it, while inquiring of God, getting into that space of saying, God, is this something? And that means stopping, which I don't like doing. But it means stopping and saying, God, this new speaking engagement, should I take it up? And then waiting to see if he says yes or no. So one of the things I've learned is not to say yes to a speaking engagement for at least a week until, and that doesn't go down well with most people, but to at least for a week so that I can say, I've asked God. And, so.
Again, it's the humility of just knowing you're not God and what does he have here? And I think we can be so dependent upon ourselves or just think, oh yeah, I should just do this. But I love hearing about that kind of change of pattern for you, but then your openness about some of those rhythms in your family life. I love hearing about that. It's inspiring to me. It makes me think about some things. Oh, what could we do? Even as our kids are out of the home and we're thinking about new rhythms of kind of empty nesting and how do we cultivate a spiritual rhythm with our family in a different season of life. So it makes me curious to think about what that could look like. And of course, none of us get it right. We are very much in the process of all these things. Oh, this is so great.
That's the big lesson I've been learning, is to watch the long work of God, right? And to trust it. We say God is sovereign, but we don't fully trust it because he does a long work in people's lives. He does a long work in our family's life. My kids are all launched, but that doesn't mean my work is over or God's work is over in their lives, So I still need to pray for them. I still need to parent, all of those things. But I also need to stay in that space of watching the long work of God. And that goes with the church. Yeah. The demands of ministry are urgent, but to be able to step back and say, there's a long work God is doing in this church. And how can I stop and be aware of what he's doing and then join into that thing? There's a long work God is doing in my life. How do I stop and be aware of what he's shaping right now and be obedient and join him in that, So.
That is a great word. And I think a good word for us in ministry, trusting the long work of God in whatever ministry setting. Paul says it, in that phrase I quoted at the beginning, I planted, Apollos watered, but God's giving the growth. And there is that gardening, farming imagery that just already demands a long view, and that's true in our own lives, in those that we love around us. And I think true too, a lot of things in North America talk about the decline of the church or the decline of religiosity. And I think there might be a winter upon us, but there's spring after winter. And so having that long view and long vision. Oh, Shanthini, this is such a delight. It's such a great gift to be able to have conversation with you. And I always ask every guest, if people want to catch up with you or find out more about what you're doing, is there some way that they can do that you would like to share with us?
Well, the Soul Care Institute, soulcareinstitute.com, good place to go. And, I am on social media, but because I work in the prison, my social media thing is also blocked that, it's really not useful trying to connect with me there. But you could email me, shanthiniB@gmail.com, and
wonderful.
You can find me there. So
that's great. Well, thank you so much, Shanthini. It's just a gift to know you and to have this conversation today.
Likewise, you are such a gift. I'm so proud of you and of what God is doing through you.
Thank you, friend. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Field Notes for Pastors. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it with a friend. Give us a like or subscribe to this podcast on platforms where you listen. This podcast is linked with my forthcoming book, The Pastor as Gardener, a renewed vision for ministry, set to be released by Erdman's Publishing on March 24th, 2026. You can pre-order the book anywhere good books are found. And if you do pre-order the book, I have put together some resources as a gift to you. Find out how to access those pre-order resources via my website, mwerickson.com. Until next time, may you experience God's grace wherever God has planted you.